All right. The Indian-Pakistan situation has escalated. It's not that many days. We talked about it last Friday, right? And we were
Yeah,
saying uh,
yeah,
there probably just will continue to be some verbal exchange, tough talk, and
yeah,
but now it has been escalated. So the latest one
yeah,
is, as you know, India strikes deep inside Pakistan. Now, India is saying they were targeting terrorist infrastructure, but Pakistan said that there were civilians killed. All right. And now Pakistan retaliated by shooting down 6 fighter jets. And so I so far we haven't seen any evidence that India hasn't produced any evidence link this terror attack in Kashmir to Pakistan. I got the feeling that
yeah.
Modi and India wants to have this war. What do you think?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think this Modi is a prime minister who has become prime minister of India very, very much on a strong nationalist program. And when I say when I talk about nationalism, on a Hindu nationalist
Mhm.
program, I mean he is a supporter of what is called Hindutva, which basically sees the Hindu civilization as the civilization of India and around which India would should be constructed. I don't think he likes Muslims very much at all. I don't think he likes Pakistan very much at all. And there is undoubtedly a stridency about this whole movement within India, which is concerning. And I think that he probably feels that unless he takes or is appears to take a very, very hard line against Pakistan, he will lose face with his supporters. And I'm afraid I don't think anyway that he really wants to take a moderate line with
Mhm.
Pakistan because I think he shares in this the sort of belligerence, the confrontational attitudes of his supporters. So that's why we are where we are. I mean, I don't think he was ever likely to show much restraint. And well, we see that he's not showing any real signs of restraint.
Now, what is his goal for having this conflict with Pakistan? Um, is does he want to take territories from Pakistan to take the whole Kashmir? Kashmir right now is divided, right? There is certain parts controlled by Pakistan and then some parts by India. He wants to take the whole Kashmir or even go beyond that. What is his goal for this?
I, I think if he has a plan
Hmm.
to actually send ground troops beyond the line of control and to try to capture the whole of Kashmir, then I mean he's gambling incredibly dangerously. Pakistan will resist that. Pakistan is a nuclear power.
Hmm.
I think many people in Pakistani controlled Kashmir will resist it also. And I think there will be a very, very strong reaction from across the Muslim world. And if Pakistan feels that it's got its back to the wall, I'm afraid the danger of it using nuclear weapons becomes very, very real. So India does have claims to the rest of Kashmir, but I think, firstly, it would be an unwinnable battle. I mean, Pakistan is not as powerful a country as India is, but it's still a powerful country. And it would be a very dangerous battle because Pakistan has nuclear weapons. And at the moment, I think that most of the world is, if not exactly supportive of India, it's not going to go out of its way to restrain it. But if India starts on what is seen as a war of conquest, then I'm afraid the calculus will change. And countries that have been sympathetic to India until this moment will probably cease to be so. I hope that people are explaining all of this to Prime Minister Modi and are telling him, you can go so far, but no further. If you limit this to a number of missile and airstrikes, then this will be accepted by the international community. I mean, they won't be happy, but they will accept it. But if we start going into all out war type scenarios, then of course everything will change and it will India's position will um, become isolated around the world.
I feel like these kind of thing, they have the tendency to go towards escalating. You look at the Ukraine and Russian conflict. Well, even though I know that the West has been pressuring uh, and Moscow and the Russia has been frustrated. Despite all that, I actually was still surprised when Russia did just started this military operation.
Yeah.
The same thing with Gaza. After October 7th, so we all know what Israel wants,
Yeah.
but I still thought, well, a full out, killing civilians and genocide in today's world, everybody's watching. I thought it was unlikely, but here we are, right? And the same thing here. We talked about
Well,
last
it is.
week. So don't you think there's a tendency escalating towards real conflict?
Oh, there is. There is no doubt about this. I mean, I think there are differences. I mean, you talked about Ukraine, and certainly I think a lot of people were taken very by surprise when the Russians did go into Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, and in spite of doing that, and they've suffered political and diplomatic consequences for doing so. I mean, for about a year, they were very much on the diplomatic back foot, as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
But they were very, very careful and have continued to be very, very careful ever since not to conduct what you might call a total war
Yeah.
against Ukraine. I mean, they've
Mm-hmm.
tried to avoid attacking cities. They've tried to avoid attacking civilian infrastructure. They've announced occasional ceasefires. They've, as Putin just said, they've tried to avoid um, being provoked
Mm-hmm.
into actions that would ultimately work against them. Now, Israel didn't do that after the events of October 2023. On the contrary, it went for all-out war in Gaza and for genocide there,
Mm-hmm.
with all the results we've seen. The risk is, well, India has a choice. It either models what it is doing after Russia. Though, I mean, to be clear, I mean, this is a horrible terrorist incident in Kashmir, but it was not ultimately on the scale of the kind of existential challenge that
Mm-hmm.
Russia felt it was facing
Yeah.
with Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
So, but, having said that, it can either continue to exercise discipline and control, perhaps looking at what the Russians have done, or it can follow the Israeli copybook,
Mm-hmm.
in which case it will be a catastrophe. And we could very well find ourselves in a situation where nuclear war um, becomes a real possibility. It's important to say that not only does Pakistan possess a lot of nuclear weapons, but I understand that the decision-making process there is decentralized. And Pakistan has a first-use policy. So, which inevitably it does, because it is so much the weaker party. So there may come a point where the Pakistanis feel they have no alternative but to use nuclear weapons, because if they are defeated in Kashmir, for example, then it could be that the entire survival of the state, the Pakistani state, comes into question. So, it's something that one would like to think that Modi and his officials understand. I know there are a lot of people in India who do understand it, but Modi's background and that of his political movement put a big question mark over whether they actually do.
But now, I think you talked about this before, that the last election, even though Modi kept his position as the prime minister, his party was much weakened in that election. Could this
Yes.
be his way of getting some tractions, get people diverted attention? This part of the reason he's so eager to have this conflict. Could that be?
Yes, yes, I think it is. I think it's slightly more complicated than that, in the sense that I think the fact that he was significantly weakened in that election will make him even more anxious to hold on to that part of his support, which he still has,
Mhm.
which is the more militant part. So
Mhm.
it creates a greater trend towards radicalization. And by the way, I've met Indians who don't like Muslims, and the way they talk about Muslims is really chilling. Actually, I mean, it can be very, very frightening and very, very ugly. So some of these people that Modi relies on have, I have to say, frankly, very extreme views. So not that different from, say, Israeli settlers on the West Bank in terms of, I mean, that kind of, well, if you like, extreme, almost fanatical outlooks. So that will push him towards, taking hard line. But also, again, it's the classic way for a leader in trouble to try to strengthen his support. It's precisely, start a war. There'll be a rally around you because you're the war leader. If it turns out well, you come out as the genius. Margaret Thatcher did that with the Falklands. Why shouldn't Modi may say, why shouldn't it work for him too?
But he has to think a little bit. I think when he's doing these kind of things, he's alienated a lot of Muslim countries in the world, right? Which is a lot of countries, a big, huge population, Muslim populations. He has to put that into his thoughts as well, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, he should do. Absolutely, he should also worry about how the large Muslim community inside India will feel. There are many, many people in India who are not Muslims who are critical of this kind of approach to policy. And of course, always when you play this game of war, you should consider the risks of what happens if you fail. I mean, war is one of the most dangerous things to start. Wars are very easy to start. They're very, very difficult to end. And as one of our great writers and analysts about war, Niccolo Machiavelli once said, wars never turn out in the way expected by their initiators. They're the most unpredictable events. So you may think that all the odds favor you and that you will achieve victory, but you must always be prepared for the possibility that, on the contrary, you might suffer a defeat. That was why Machiavelli said, you should try as a prince, should try to avoid wars, not seek them.
And one of the losers, it seems like so far, is actually France, because out of those six fighter jets that shot down by Pakistan, 3 of them are French-made Rafale. India spent $9 billion to purchase 36 of them, and here you are that they are shot down by Pakistan, and Pakistan has been using the Chinese-made J-10. Now, the other fighter jets that also shut down one is the Russian-made Su-30, and the other one is a MiG-29. In any event, it seems like the Pakistanis, their fighter jets seems more powerful, perform much better than the Indians. So, not surprisingly, the Chengdu Aircraft Industry Group, their stock has skyrocketed, and it's really make the France Rafale looking maybe overvalued. What do you think?
Right. Well, can I say a few things about this? First of all, the Indians categorically deny these claims that their fighter jets are shot down. I am not there, so I don't know to what extent this is true in conflicts of this kind. Each side makes their own claims, and who knows? Even if it is true, it could very well be that the problem is not so much the fighter jets as the pilots. I happen to know that Pakistani fighter pilots are extremely well trained, and it may be that they're better pilots fighting against the Indians. It could be that, or it could be that the tactics that the Indians have been using are all wrong anyway. But what I will say about them is this. I have heard many people say, and I'm not an expert in military technology at all, that the Rafale is a grossly overrated fighter jet. It's been heavily promoted by France as the best fighter jet produced in Europe. There's lots of talk about this, but that it isn't remotely up to the standard of the more advanced fighter jets that are starting to appear around the world. So I'm perfectly willing to believe that. I just don't know definitely what the facts are.
Okay, so Xi Jinping is visiting Russia now, attending this 80th anniversary of the Victory Day celebration. And on Monday, Kiev did fire the dozens of drones, according to the mayor of Moscow. He said they intercepted them near Moscow. So Zelensky really doesn't care that he's doing this to upset world leaders and not just the Xi Jinping, but Lula and Vucic. I mean, there are 29 leaders are attending this ceremony. So by doing so, he is alienate himself with so many countries. He doesn't care at all.
It is incredible. Now, the Russians say that last night Ukraine launched 500 drones against Russia, the biggest drone attack that Ukraine has conducted up to this time. Most of them, the vast majority, the Russians say didn't get through. There was some damage done in a few places, but it's clearly a long thought out and long prepared attempt to disrupt the celebration of the holiday. And there are reports circulating that in the last couple of days, China has actually given warnings to the Europeans and has told the Europeans, the time has come for you to rein in your puppet, which is Zelensky, and tell him, look, while Xi Jinping is in Russia, you do not attack Moscow. I mean, this is a crazy thing that you do. I've seen no evidence that the Europeans have done anything to try to rein in Zelensky. And this is the problem. I mean, I think Zelensky himself has been treated by the Western powers, especially by the Europeans, as if he's some kind of, Churchill or de Gaulle or, I don't know, some kind of heroic figure. I think he's long since come to feel that whatever he does, however dangerous and reckless and wild it is, the Europeans will always be there to help him. I think he has tremendous visceral hatred now towards the Russians. I've heard that he actually loathes the Russians and loathes Putin personally. And I think he can't restrain himself in this situation. He sees this massive event being celebrated there. He probably has deep down his own feelings of guilt about this. His grandfather fought for the Red Army and was apparently a very brave soldier fighting the Nazis. So he probably has all the complexes that come from that. So anyway, he cannot restrain himself. And unfortunately, there aren't outsiders who are willing to put pressure on him and to restrain him. Have you heard a single word of criticism from anybody in the West telling him, this isn't a good idea, you must stop doing this, or just not a good idea? What you're doing is completely wrong. You must stop. If you continue to do this, we cannot support you anymore because you're endangering world peace. Have you seen anybody say that?
Yeah, it is fascinating to me that what the celebration is about defeating the Nazi Germany, right? And Zelensky himself is a Jew, and Ukraine was occupied by the Nazis, so it should be a celebration for Ukraine as well. However you feel about Russia today, I just don't get it that he could use this opportunity to try to embarrass Russia and put many people's lives in danger. It's just absolutely crazy. I think it's crazy, but okay.
Well, I mean, you're not the only person, if I may say. You go and read the Russian media. By the way, the Russians are incredibly calm about all of this. I mean, you'd be astonished how calm they are. But they are. But they've been saying this man is a lunatic for years, and they all say he uses drugs, which he. By the way, somebody who once worked for him and who's been in touch with me, not directly but through a third party, has confirmed that Oh, but it may not be true, may be true, may not be true. But I mean, he is. I mean, to me, you only have to watch him and listen to him and see the way he behaves to see what an incredibly unstable and reckless individual he actually is.
And also, I find in the West that the West doesn't believe in like a reading history in a complex and multi-dimensional way. It's all or nothing kind of a narrative, but they can never bring themselves to recognize the Soviet sacrificed greatly, tremendously during World War II to fight the Nazis. The Soviet led the fight. You can feel however you feel about today's Russia, but history is history, right? Well, why is it so hard just to recognize, what happened is what happened during World War II, and you can still criticize Russia today. The West doesn't believe that kind of a narrative, right?
No. I mean, they're not just not recognizing it; they're trying to suppress the fact of it. I mean, as a lot of people assume in the West, there's opinion polling about this, that the Russians were on the other side. I'm not suggesting that's most people, but there are people who do think that. And there are other people, I'm afraid, who think that, to the extent that we were fighting with the Russians and against the Germans, we were fighting on the wrong side, that the Germans were better than the Russians. So you get all of this weird thing going on. Why does it happen? Why does the West do this? Why do they change history? Why do they suppress so much about history? And they do this massively with the Russians. They do this massively with China.
Yeah.
I mean, in the case of China, how many people in the West know about what happened in China in the 19th century? I mean, very, very few. Well, George Orwell put it very well in 1984. He's not, which is supposed to be about other places, but really it is very much about Western and specifically British political pathologies. So that which Orwell himself admitted, but which very, very, very few people get. Anyway, Orwell said there's an expression in that book. He who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the future. So that is the outlook. You control the present, you write the past. By controlling the past, you control the future.
Well, then that means, okay, everything is one-dimensional. So you're either good or evil, but there's nothing in between.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no complexity in there, I guess.
No, the West doesn't like complexity. It doesn't like thinking. I mean, altogether. I mean, it finds the whole idea of approaching. By the way, it makes it very, very difficult because of this to enter into discussions with people like this, because people who advocate this thing, because you say, well, look, let's just unpack it. You talk about Hong Kong, for example. Let's go back and look at the history of Hong Kong and all that. Oh, so you are supporting this evil dictatorship in Beijing that's trying to suppress the people of Hong Kong. No, I'm trying to talk about the history and about the fact that Hong Kong is Chinese. So you see how it works. It's done like this, and of course, in propaganda terms, it is very successful because most people aren't able to follow the details, but in policy terms, it is catastrophic.
So other than the celebration, what do you think Xi Jinping and Putin will talk about?
Well, if they're going to be speaking if Xi Jinping is going to be in Moscow for 7 days, he's not come just to attend a parade.
Yeah.
I mean, he's gone there. I mean, important that parade is, and important that the celebrations are. He's going there because the two men have a great deal to talk about. So there's going to be a lot of discussions about economics. I'm going to make a guess that that's going to be the centerpiece of this. I mean, they're going to talk about economics, about economic cooperation. We've seen that there's been this tariff war with the United States. China is going to need to diversify some of its supplies. I mean, it bought an awful lot of oil and petroleum products from the United States. It will now, Russia's well positioned to replace all of that. It's possible they will move forward now to agreed power of Siberia too. I've heard some people suggest this. We'll have to wait and see. There will be lots of discussions on economics and all of those kind of things. And of course, they will talk about the various problems and crises that exist around the world, and they will coordinate positions and do many things of that kind. And of course, I talked about the kind of things that Russia could give to China, but the Russians will want things from China too. They're well aware about the fact that China is now leading in AI. They want to develop their own AI industries. They will offer the Chinese, no doubt, opportunities in Russia to develop various factories and perhaps to tap into Russian universities if the Chinese need to do that. Probably they don't, by the way. But anyway, that kind of thing. I think there will be a lot of that kind of discussion, which always takes place when Putin and Xi Jinping meet. And there will be more things too. There will be things that we will never learn about on military cooperation, on intelligence cooperation, things which maybe it's best not to try to speculate too much about.
So China now agrees to meet the U.S. in Geneva. Bessent announced, and the China's the foreign ministry spokesperson did confirm that. But what do you, I mean, based on their statement, so Bessent said, okay, we've got to de-escalate before we can move forward. Well, I don't think you need China to de-escalate. You're the one who started. Why don't you start to de-escalate?
This is again, I mean, talking about rewriting history. The history is only about 3 weeks old and they're already rewriting it. I mean, who started this whole round? I mean, it's I'll tell you what's happened. It's very, very simple. I mean, the Americans, Trump started these enormous tariff war against China. He was completely taken aback when China reciprocated. He spread stories and has been spreading stories, ever since he first started doing it. He was still saying it until a couple of days ago that Xi Jinping was begging him to try to lift these things, that he'd had all these contacts with Xi Jinping, none of which was true. He claimed that China was, seeking to was engaging in secret negotiations. There weren't any secret negotiations. There was pictures circulated of some Asian-looking men entering, I think it was the executive office or whatever it's called in the West Wing. And of course, it was not the Chinese delegation that we were talked about. There was lots of talk that all kinds of countries were queuing up to agree trade deals with the US that would cut their links with China. We've seen no such trade deals. What we do know, and I don't think there's any doubt about this, is that top American retailers have been contacting the administration and have been saying to them, look, we've got to bring this thing under control because in a few weeks' time, you're going to have shortages of key consumer goods in American stores. And I think at that point, finally, the penny dropped. And they said, well, look, we've got to de-escalate. We've got to try and meet the Chinese. We've got to see what we can do. So they contacted the Chinese, which they previously said they wouldn't do. They were waiting for the Chinese to contact them. But by the way, I should say that on the MAGA side, you're still seeing people claim that it was China that asked for this meeting. When we know it was the other. We actually, I mean, here, there's no doubt about it. We know it was the other way around. Anyway, they finally reached out to China and said, let's have this meeting in Switzerland and see where we can take it from there. And when Bessent talks about de-escalation, what you can see is that they're looking for a face-saving way to start bringing down the tariffs. So that's really what it's all about. So China's won, or at least it hasn't yet won, but it's close to that point.
Yeah, the China's foreign ministry spokesperson Li Jian, he did said in a press conference, he said that Beijing's position of firmly opposing U.S. abuse of tariffs has not changed. Sounds to me like China is going to play a hardball, right? So, yeah.
Well, of course they are. Why wouldn't they? I mean, obviously, I mean, quite apart from anything else, um, if China didn't play hardball, in a few weeks' time, the tariffs would be going up again. I mean, if it seemed as if China was making concessions, given the kind of people who are running things in Washington, not just Trump himself, but people like Peter Navarro and Stephen Moran and all of those, Stefan Moran and all of these people who hate China. I've heard that Scott Besson hates China too, by the way. These people who hate China, if they see any sign of weakening on China's side, they will do what they always do. They will escalate more. So, of course, China is going to take the strongest possible stand.
Well, there is a lingering problem with U.S. Debt and finance in general. The Federal Reserve, just recently spent 20 billion on 3-year bonds, the largest single-day purchase since 2021. And now the Fed is having a meeting today, my understanding, and it sounds like they're not going to cut the interest rate, and that's what Trump wanted. But in any event, if the interest rate is not bringing down, and they clearly, we talked about this before, have some debt obligations, that the maturity of the bonds, a huge amount in June, they need to do something. I mean, Trump needs to do something. They really don't need this tariff war to continue, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, the US economy is driving towards a cliff. I mean, even the Trump people can see this now. The Fed is not in a position to cut interest rates. China can cut interest rates. It's just done so, by the way.
Yeah.
China can cut interest rates because it's got a solid position. It's got deflation, not inflation. It's a strong position to cut interest rates. The US has no such has no such room. So of course they have to start taking those steps, and that's why they're talking. That's why they're now coming to Switzerland to speak to the Chinese to try to bring these tariffs down. This was so ill thought out, so badly prepared, so ill judged, so much informed by prejudice and bigotry and listening to people like Gordon Chang, who only yesterday I was reading an article by him in the British media saying, that Xi Jinping won't survive these latest tariff moves. I mean, why people continue to give Gordon Chang the time of day, I simply don't understand.
Yeah. Some people jokingly in China, he's a joke in China, and people are saying he must be a Chinese spy, to spread this information to let the West believe the false narrative about China, so they will be ill prepared to deal with China. So,
yes.
Now, talk about tariffs. Trump saying he's going to impose tariffs on movies made outside the U.S. Why does he do that? I don't quite. First of all, what does it mean? Is he talking about movies that are produced by foreign movie studios, or movies, no matter who's producing it, as long as they made outside the U.S.? But in terms of Hollywood movies, it's kind of complicated because they do a lot of shootings and making the movie kind of outside the United States, in particular, like Canada. But they do the post-production, the all the other jobs like inside in LA. So how does that even work? I don't understand.
I don't think anybody knows. I don't think that Donald Trump himself quite knows, actually. I don't think perhaps he realizes the extent to which Hollywood movies aren't made in Hollywood anymore. By the way, it's been so since at least the 1960s. I mean, all these huge Hollywood epics, Ben-Hur, for example. was mainly filmed in Rome, not in Hollywood at all, because it was always so much cheaper, and there were all kinds of rules around it. Maybe he thinks that if he imposes these tariffs and the films are back made again in Hollywood itself, then that will provide some jobs there. Who knows? I don't know. But again, I wonder whether this isn't a soft power, hard power thing. That Hollywood isn't the force that it was. It doesn't have the enormous global influence that it did. Horror of horrors, people are actually watching Chinese films. Some people are watching Chinese films in the US as well. So we must keep these terrible films out and make sure that they only watch American ones. I mean, there is. I just get the sense that there is something of that about this too. The problem with Hollywood, and I just say it straightforwardly, it hasn't been making films for years now that anybody, in my opinion, really wants to watch.
Yeah.
I mean, there was, a couple of months ago, about a year, I can't remember how long, there was Gladiator 2. Remember that? Whatever became of it. I mean, just came and went as far as I could see. I mean, nobody showed any interest in it. So, this is the real problem with Hollywood. If people really got there and sorted out and, worked on producing some really good films, maybe people would want to watch them. Not endless action, a comic strip character story, films based on comic strip characters with completely unfunny dialogue, which is supposed to be funny and that kind of thing.
Yeah, the U.S. service industry, including Hollywood movies, that they are the one who's running a trade surplus. So if Trump really cares about this trade imbalance, Trump shouldn't do this, to disrupt this, because it works, according to himself. He likes surplus, right?
It's a surplus, but it's a completely artificial surplus. I mean, this is something I know about because my brother was for many years the secretary of the Scriptwriters Guild of Great Britain. So, it's all about how the movie industry works. The thing to understand is that the surplus basically comes from the fact that in many countries, and especially in Europe, but a lot of countries outside Europe too, the US owns the cinemas. US companies own the cinemas, Odeon, one of these things. So they make sure that they show American films. So people are not able to see films from other countries because the Americans have a virtual, or have had a virtual monopoly of distribution. And of course, what always happens when there is a monopoly is that the quality decays after a time, which is what we're now seeing. So it is a fact that the film industry is not in a particularly strong shape at the moment. Well, there it is. I mean, that's probably his answer to this. I suspect that what's happened is that behind the scenes, there's been a great deal of industry lobbying. People from Hollywood have been coming along and saying, we need protection. There's all these cheap, bad films from China that are coming in and are undermining our great and glorious and wonderful Hollywood industry, which is producing all these stellar masterpieces. And therefore, we need tariffs. So I, knowing the way Washington works, I suspect an awful lot of that sort of thing is going on.
Well, one country is actually Britain. Britain produces lots of movies that are, popular, and not movie, but also TV series that are popular in the United States. So this will impact British movies as well, right? So is there any reactions there?
There's a huge amount of reaction. There's a lot of worry. I mean, I'll give you an example. The British a production company has just recently sold the entirety of the James Bond franchise to Amazon. And that all means that Amazon, that is to say Jeff Bezos, now has complete control over the next James Bond film. All James Bond films, without exception, have been made in Britain, in British studios. if the next one is made in the United States, I mean, it will be a massive blow to the British film industry, for which the James Bond franchise is, I mean, its importance economically simply cannot be overstated for the rest of the industry. And of course, if it's made in the United States, people also worry that this British cultural artifact won't be British anymore. The reason Britain has a strong film industry, by the way, is again, to some extent, for the same reason as America, which is distribution. Britain has controlled distribution through the BBC. The BBC hires and produces a lot of television drama, which, because of its prestige and to some extent its quality, it can then export to the US. I don't know if the quality is that great anymore, but anyway, they do. And that does provide a base for a film industry in Britain. And the British have also been able to use their studios. And they say, Pinewood in particular does a lot of work for Hollywood as well. So a lot of the Star Wars films, a lot of the work in the Star Wars films was actually done in Britain. Even though people think of Star Wars as a purely American thing, but a lot of it was done, the filming was actually done in Pinewood. So if all that goes, that is an important part of the British cultural and service economy. Again, not to be underestimated.
Okay, so Oman, they broke the US-Yemen ceasefire. Which is a little bit, I mean, a little bit surprising, but maybe not, because US is not doing very well in the Red Sea. It seems like being attacked all the time by the Houthis. Although the Houthis did say that they will continue its operation against Israel over Israel's aggression on Gaza, but it seems like the US is scaling back, at least. In the meantime, also we saw Mike Waltz, the national security advisor. So you can say he get promoted, but of course he got demoted, right? But anyway, so he's upset Trump. My understanding is mainly because he was trying to push for this full-out war against Iran, and also in constant contact with somebody in Israel, and Trump didn't like that. Anyway, so seems to me Trump, in terms of both the Houthis, the Red Sea area, and against Iran, he wants to scale back. And there's some forces in his inner circle that are against that. Is that what's going on right now?
That's exactly right. I mean, I think the thing to say about the Houthi affair is not that the Americans, are trying to scale back. It's that they've been defeated. I mean, we should be straightforward about this. I mean, we shouldn't cover for them. I mean, they came in. Mike Waltz apparently was a major advocate of this, because it's clear he's been working very closely with the Israelis. The Israelis wanted the Americans to attack the Houthis. The Americans attacked the Houthis. They conducted all kinds of missile and airstrikes against the Houthis, and they achieved nothing. They didn't defeat the Houthis. And what is now happening is that the Houthis are becoming more successful in retaliating against the Americans, and American warships are becoming threatened. I mean, we've had apparently 2 F-18 fighter jets that have now been lost, very publicly as well. There's no doubt about these fighter jets having been lost. And it's only a matter of time. Most people think it's only a matter of time before a US warship is hit and damaged seriously by a Houthi missile. So the US has had to pull back, and that is a defeat. It's something that has been forced on them. Now, Waltz apparently was the big advocate of this. And it turns out that Waltz was also working with the Israelis to try to get this war against Iran started. Trump doesn't want an all-out war with Iran, and he knows that his electoral base doesn't. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Georgia representative who says that she speaks of the MAGA movement, and probably does to some extent at least, she has come out and she said quite straightforwardly, we do not want to see a war with Iran. We may not like Iran, but we do not want the United States to be involved in yet another war in the Middle East, and certainly not one against Iran. So I think that Trump registered all of that. He's probably retained some suspicions, as I do, about the Goldberg Signal Gate affair.
Yeah.
I don't really take very seriously these claims that it was all a mistake. I have to say that.
Yeah, you said
And
that.
yeah, exactly. So it's time for Waltz to go. But here again, you see that there's a whiff of weakness about this, because Waltz is working with the Israelis. He's trying to involve the United States in a war against Iran. He's going against the policy of the very same president who he's supposed to be serving. So do you just sack him? No, you appoint him UN ambassador instead. I mean, it demonstrates again that Trump is very nervous of taking these people on head on, and they remain immensely strong within his administration. And you see that on the one hand, he doesn't want a war with Iran. On the other, the rhetoric against Iran is escalating. And he published that tweet, or rather, so that message on Truth Social, about how any country that does any business with Iran will no longer have any business with the United States, and that Iran must give up its entire nuclear program, not just those parts of it that could result in a nuclear weapon, but even the parts that are legitimate and a part of its civilian economy, or for its health system, or any of that. It must do away with all of that, apparently, something that the Iranians are never going to agree to. So you see that even if he clearly doesn't want a war, he's not doing enough to foreclose that possibility. So one can't be too encouraged by this.
Yeah. I got the feeling also. The forces around him is so strong, so powerful.
So strong,
yeah. The German chancellor. So we got a new German chancellor after some drama, right? Merz finally, the first round of vote, he didn't get enough vote to become the chancellor, which apparently never happened in the German history. So what's your take on that? He must be not very popular. Is that what it is?
He isn't. It is absolutely unprecedented. He's the coalition that he's got, which is his own party, the CDU, the sister party of the CDU, which is the CSU, and the Social Democrats, control, in theory, 328 votes in the German parliament. In the first round to appoint Merz, they only got 310 votes. So 18 MPs from the coalition either abstained, or in the case of 5, voted against Merz. I mean, we know that they did because the opposition has 302, and the votes against Merz were 307. So he's clearly got lots of opponents and enemies within his coalition. Now, they held the second vote. People were brought into line. This time, I think it was 325 voted for Merz, which means that 3 still didn't. So, I mean, there's clearly opposition to him. And I have to say, the more I've seen him close up now, as I have since the election, the less impressed by him I am. And the more I understand why people in Germany don't like him. He's very abrasive. He's very arrogant. He believes he's a genius, which he isn't, by the way. And his views are what you might call conventional, but completely out of date. I mean, he in foreign policy, I mean, he still thinks the world is what it was. Well, in 1990 or sometime around then. I mean,
he apparently he had a fight or some kind of power struggle against Angela Merkel in 2002. So it seems like within the CDU,
Yeah.
there are two factions, at least two factions. One is
Yeah.
the Angela Merkel faction of it, and the other is his. Because
Yes.
after that fight, he left. He left politics for quite a few
Yes.
years and worked for a law firm, but also he was at one point the board member of the BlackRock. So, so with that kind of background, we can pretty much know what type of person that
Yes.
that he is.
Yes.
But you know, the larger problem is what Germany go from here, because Angela Merkel is the one who convinced Putin to build the Nord Stream 2. So I got the feeling Angela Merkel and her faction within the CDU, they are more independent, more thinking
Yeah.
more from Germany's perspective, where apparently this Merz guy, he is, for many Germans, he's too pro-America, too close to America. Is that your
Well,
interpretation?
absolutely. That's exactly what he's the most pro-American politician to become Chancellor of Germany
Uh-huh.
since the 50s. I mean, since Adenauer in the 1950s. The most pro-American, the most anti-Russian, the most anti-Chinese. Also, by the way,
Mhm.
but of course, he imagines an America which is pre-Trump. So
Mhm.
already he's looking shaky there too. But you're absolutely correct. And the other thing to say is that, of course, BlackRock has a particularly bad reputation in Germany. If you
Uh-huh.
know, if there's a German TV series called Heimat, which was made many years ago, it means homeland, which is about the history of Germany. It's about, it traces a family, the life of a family from 1918 until about 1990, roughly.
Mhm.
Anyway, and it was made many years ago, but there's a sequence in it in which one of the members of the family falls uh, under, it falls, his business fails because he trusts a very, very sinister American finance
Mhm.
company, which is
Mhm.
obviously BlackRock. It's very thinly disguised. So, yeah, that's a popular TV series in Germany. It gives you a sense of what Germans think about BlackRock altogether. And here's Merz, who's associated with it. He's now the
Mhm.
Chancellor of Germany. And in fact, to the extent that he has an economic program for Germany, it is the kind of program that you would expect somebody who's worked for BlackRock to come up with. I mean, it's very, very much, expand debt, financialize the economy in all kinds of ways. I mean, he no doubt believes in all of this,
Mhm.
that this is the way to modernize Germany's economy, to make it more like an American economy. But of course, it's not the kind of economy or society that many Germans are used to or want to become a part of.
Well, isn't that interesting that now we have a German chancellor who used to work for BlackRock, and then we have the Canadian Prime Minister who
Yeah,
used to work for the Bank of England, but
yeah,
Mark Carney also used to work for Goldman Sachs as well.
yeah,
So
yeah.
these bankers are getting more and more influential.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
they used to, the bankers are behind the scene, right? They're always been very influential, but they behind the scene. But now there seems like they even step forward to become the head of the states, so.
What is even most extraordinary about this is that if you live in the West, as we both do, you would know that so many of the problems originate with the financial crisis of
Uh-huh.
2008, which is caused by precisely the kind of people and institutions that are now gaining so much influence. So, the more you fail, the more you succeed in the West. And, there's lots of talk about, we need more manufacturing, we need more industry, we need
Mhm.
to focus on technology and AI and all of that. Where are the engineers? Where are the scientists? Where are the people who understand these things, who are entering government and are working to achieve these objectives? You can look for a telescope for them. You might eventually find one somewhere, but I don't know where that person is because I haven't seen them.
Now, Mark Carney, he's visiting the United States. Do you feel, I got the feeling it's kind of a not very productive visit. There were moments that almost a little bit tense because he was talking about Trump still talking about the 51 state, and his answer was, as a real estate developer, you should know some places, just not for sale. And then Trump's response is, never say never. So there are even those kind of little bit tense moments. So what's your take on his visit to the United States?
Well, it was I suppose it had to happen. I mean,
Uh-huh.
very difficult to see how a prime minister of Canada would not visit the United States. So I don't criticize it
Mm-hmm.
because it happened. I mean, it had to happen. But as a meeting, it just exposed the enormous gulf between the two men and the fact that fundamentally they don't like each other. That was how it came across to me.
So it's a courtesy visit, right? Not
Yeah.
not a real. Okay, there is no real.
Well, there's no substance to it. I mean,
Uh-huh.
the meeting between Putin and Xi, which is about to happen, is going to have lots of substance to it. I mean, the Carney and Trump visit isn't going to have any substance behind it at all.
Mm.
No meeting between Western leaders has the kind of substance that a Putin Xi meeting would have. You're not going to see Western leaders sit with their experts across the table from each other, spend a whole day in detailed discussions, discuss the various problems, work them through, move forward on all the kind of technical issues, consult the various companies, work out the plans, the costings. You're never going to see anything like that between leaders in the West. It's a very, very long time since I saw anything like that between the leaders of the West myself. I think I'd have to go back to the 80s, really.
Well, don't you think that part of the reason they don't have that kind of a in-depth cooperation, working together, is that they don't know what to do? I mean, look at Trump. He's talking so much about bring the jobs back to the United States. It seems like the whole purpose of this tariff war is to do that. And yet, Tim Cook just recently said that he's planning to make all the iPhones in India instead of China. Well, that's not bring jobs back to the United
No,
States.
no.
So what exactly is happening here, right? And Trump didn't seem knows what to do. And he's like, okay, then he thought, okay, we should continue to have this tariff war, even though it's a bad idea already. Everybody told him. So now he's going to have tariffs on all the movies made outside the United States.
Yeah.
Just, I don't think that he has a clear goal, what exactly he's trying to achieve, I
Well,
feel.
he obviously doesn't. And I have to say this altogether. There was when he became president, the first 2 weeks, it looked like quite an impressive start. A lot of energy. Doge coming in, cutting things, getting USAID closed down and all of that. It looked as if we were going to end up seeing something happen. But it seems to me that all that momentum, to the extent it was real, has gone now. I mean, the tariff war has been a failure. There's been no rethinking of the underlying problems of the United States. You're absolutely right to talk about the Apple story because you're completely correct. How does it benefit America, American jobs to have apples made in India instead of China? It'll simply make them more expensive, by the way, because, well, I mean, we won't go into that. But anyway, but you could say the same about foreign policy. I mean, the war in Ukraine is going on. The conflict with Iran is still going on. All of these things are still going on. And there's no real sign that we're getting any genuine progress to deal with any of them. And we've had this extraordinary deal with the minerals in Ukraine, which has produced an investment vehicle which looks very much like the kind of ones that the Americans always produce, which leads to nothing in the end. Anyway, it all reminds me of a famous quip that was made by a Russian prime minister back in the 90s. And when he was talking about Russia's various attempts during that ghastly decade to conduct economic reform. And he said, we meant well, but everything turned out as always. I mean, it's exactly the same here. We mean well, but everything turns out exactly as it was before.
One more thing that got lots of attention just the past few days is Jeffrey Sachs, during one of his interviews, he talked about that the COVID originated. He said with the 99% of the certainty the COVID virus originated from UNC Chapel Hill, so in the United States. This is not a new theory, even though it got lots of attention now. There is a person called David Martin. He gave a speech for the European Parliament International COVID Summit in 2020. That was his conclusion as well. UNC Chapel Hill, their lab has producing the COVID-19 virus. So that is one piece of it. Garland Nixon, not that long ago, also had a program about that. His conclusion was Fort Detrick was the one who leaked the virus. So the virus seems like a produced, made in Chapel Hill, UNC Chapel Hill, but somehow got leaked from Fort Detrick. So these are, lots of people in China believe that as well. The Fort Detrick is where lots of people think is where it's got leaked, not in Wuhan. And also, Trump signed an executive order that restricted the gain of function research, which is good. I agree with that. But in his executive order, he mentioned China in particular. It sounds to me like he's trying to ban the function of research on pathogens for China. And China, of course, is very unhappy about this. China strikes back with a white paper demanding a full investigation. China pointed out that there were COVID cases reported earlier than what the U.S. government claims, stuff like that. So there's this spat about the origin, the COVID origin again. I do think there need to be some kind of investigation by some authoritative organizations or something to have a good understanding of what happened with the COVID virus, don't you think?
Well, it is absolutely essential. I mean, this is a huge event. I mean, you can argue about the responses that took place around the world, but I mean, those were enormous themselves. It's had a massive effect on societies everywhere around the world. I mean, and what ought to have happened afterwards is that there should have been a proper investigation, perhaps through the agencies of the United Nations. It should have reported publicly. There should have been all kinds of people involved. It should have been a collaborative affair. But what happened was, right from the very first day, it was politicized, and it was seized by the usual people in the United States, including Trump himself. Remember, he was talking about the Chinese virus or whatever it was and all that. So, and that opportunity to conduct an investigation was lost. Well, maybe not lost, but it was delayed. And of course, the longer it takes, the more difficult it will be, because the samples are probably being destroyed, the paperwork is probably being destroyed, the witnesses probably being silenced or paid off or whatever, and the trail is going cold now. I don't think we will get to the bottom of this, I'm sorry to say. I think too many very powerful people are involved. I used to be one of those people who believed in the natural origin of this. After all, that was what most scientists at one time were saying. I don't believe that any longer. I've come round to the view that probably there was something happened by someone. I strongly suspect that whoever was responsible was someone in the United States, because if it really was China, you would have expected that the US would be at the forefront in pressing for an investigation, which it clearly isn't. So that points to an American origin, conceptual, practical, who's to say? And is there any chance that we're going to see an outcome? Well, maybe in 20, 30 years, but I don't think any time sooner than that. And this is very dangerous, because it's likely that, given that the people who were responsible have not been brought to account for it, that something like this will happen again. I didn't even know that gain of function was happening until the pandemic began. I can say for an absolute fact that 99.9999999% of well-informed people who follow the news and take an interest in these kind of things, I'm not talking about the great mass of humanity, didn't know that gain of function research was taking place. The very fact the very nature of that research shows that there needed to be a proper public debate about it, which never, of course, happened. So that already rings alarm bells and tells you that something very bad and very wrong was happening.
Well, that's part of the danger of this, that we don't even know. Even though this gain of function research has been going on for a long time, according to this David Martin, in his speech to the European Parliament International COVID Summit in 2020, he's saying they have been doing this since the 60s. And it's not just the United States, but involves Britain and some European countries as well. And he even said SARS in 2013, there was a SARS outbreak in China. He even says the SARS virus was produced in the labs. So this is nothing new. But like you said, we don't even know how dangerous this research is. And there's so little that we know about, right? That's the danger of this whole thing that really need to be addressed, I think.
Of course, and the further back it goes, the more likely it is that we're not looking at attempts to create, engineered viruses for, medical purposes, to create bad medical purposes, to create, antidotes to these diseases which didn't exist but which we are creating. If you go back as far as the 60s, then it's more likely than not that we're looking at experiments to create biological weapons.
Yeah.
I mean, that would have been at least the founding purpose, because in the 60s, and I lived in the 60s, I remember the 60s, people weren't thinking yet in terms of creating mRNA vaccines or any of that kind of thing.
Well, the other thing is, regardless of what happened, I feel like it is these kind of times that U.S. should take the lead to demand some kind of an investigation. That on the one hand, the U.S. always believed it's the world leader, but then times like this, that the U.S. should take the lead, demand some kind of answer or investigation. U.S. is not interested. Like, right? No, U.S. is always interested in having war somewhere, stir troubles. But when it's time to take the lead, for example, AI, I really think U.S. and China should started looking into the ethnic aspect of AI, because we will come to a point the AI will be so powerful that the human might not even be able to control it. And also the other aspect is that more and more jobs are lost because of AI. So what should we do, right? These kind of discussions need to happen. And China and the US are the leading countries. They should have this kind of discussion. US is not interested. So in times that when you really need US leadership, the US is like, we're not interested. Is it?
Well, exactly. Because I mean, as we've discussed in many programs, I mean, the US is ultimately, like all Western countries, it's focused on power. And unless you understand that, nothing about what they do ultimately makes sense. So from their point of view, if conducting these kind of investigations, or alternatively looking at the philosophical questions of AI, undermines its prospects of maximizing its power, then the United States simply doesn't want to be involved. By the way, on that issue, and I mean, my wife, as you know, is an academic. I mean, I happen to know that within the world of science and technology, the very, very furthest edge, they're talking about this in the universities. They say that philosophy has never been more important as a discipline, precisely because it is necessary through philosophy to look at these questions. Which country has an exemplary tradition in philosophy? just saying.
Yes. Yeah, we talk about the test, right? That throughout the Chinese history, the emperor of those tests, philosophy is a big part of it. Yes.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are philosophical schools that go back millennia, a massive tradition in philosophy and philosophical thinking, one based very much on humanist ideas. If you're looking at interest in nature, Taoism, I mean, all of that, I mean, surely you would want to tap into all of that. I mean, it would be
Yeah.
the moment to just
Yes.
say,
Yes. And
just
I
asking
think,
on that place.
yeah, I think it makes sense when the Chinese
Mm,
Huangdi, when they interview, the last step
yeah,
for these
yeah,
people who are trying to get into the high level of the government running the country, the last step is the Huangdi will interview the person,
yeah,
right? And the interview always the Huangdi always interested in this person's worldview about
yeah,
things.
yeah,
I think it makes sense, right? Because the worldview would tell you what kind of leader that person is, right? How this
yeah,
person will run things. It tells you a
yeah.
lot about this person through this person's worldview and philosophical answers to these questions. It makes sense. I actually think it does.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I should say one of the books that maybe understand and take an interest in China more than any others is a book about a political conflict that happened in the early 16th century in the Ming dynasty, which
Uh-huh.
is the Huangdi at the time died. He died without leaving an heir, so
Mhm.
they had to decide which other member of the dynasty would replace him. And then the question was whether the new Huangdi would honor the previous Huangdi as his father or would continue to honor his biological father as his
Mhm.
father. And this created an enormous controversy and a massive discussion in China. Now, putting it in that way, it all sounds very esoteric and what difference does
Mhm.
it make and all of that? And weren't these people wasting their time arguing about these unimportant things? But actually, when you go beneath the surface, you discover that the whole discussion was about ethics,
Uh-huh.
about virtue, about how to, whether feeling should take priority over intellect.
Yeah.
All of these enormous philosophical questions were discussed and played out in a massive and very very interesting way.
Mhm.
And the quality of intellectual debate, so I believe in China it's called the Great Ritual Controversy, by the way. I don't know
Mhm.
how that translates into Chinese, but the level of intellectual debate was really quite astonishing. It was as if the whole of China was like a university common room, the philosophical department of a university common room, Cambridge or something like that. It was really on that level.
Mhm.
Just saying.
Okay. So let's talk next week. It seems like just the past few days, a lot of things happened. It
Oh,
seems like,
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Let's see what happens until next Wednesday. Thank you so much.
indeed. My pleasure. Have a great day. Have a great
You too.
week.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.